Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, from a magnificent Cape Town. As I sit here and look outside the window, it's a beautiful, clear evening, not a cloud in the sky, beautiful, windless day. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you here to the last webinar. My co host, of course, is Professor Steve Jeffrey, and we're ably assisted by our sponsors, Sonia and Sangiso of Aspen. They're going to be speaking about their product in a very short way, in a very short time. So, Chris, thank you very much indeed for setting it up. When you put out the program, Chris, I got a lot of very, very, very strongly worded emails. Firstly, a half a dozen emails from Henny Buerta saying, listen, you put the wrong picture up, and a half a dozen emails from Dari Buerta saying, listen, you put the wrong picture up. So at last, I hope the right picture went up in the end, because we had a lot of angry people saying, that's not me, or that's not him. So it's wonderful to have you all over here. Sadly, it's the episode 7, season 27, which is the last webinar of our year. And we'll be starting again in February next year. So the update on HPV is our topic. And it's a great privilege and an honor to have Mr. HPV or Professor HPV, Professor Henny Buerta, on our panel over here. And he's going to be giving us the update on HPV. Just before we start with Aspen and Songiso, Henny, would you like to say a few words about what we were talking about?
Yes, Peter. Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me again. I think I've been on this platform once or twice before, but maybe just a quick advertisement for SASOG. The SASOG Congress for 2026 will be in Cape Town at the Century City Conference Center between 5 and 8 August. So please put that in your Outlook calendars for next year. I hope it will be a spectacular event. We hope that everybody will be here from South Africa, Africa, and the world. We hope to put together an excellent program with lots of activities and discussion. So, yeah, thanks for having me again. Peter, will not, because this is the last event for the year, I will not keep you busy for a full hour. But there will be plenty of time for people to ask questions afterwards.
Henny, would you mind if you are interrupted, or would you prefer to have all the questions as a tranche at the end? Some people like to be interrupted. Some people like to keep them all at the end. Would you want to be interrupted as the questions arise, or take them all as a bunch? I can write them down at the end. Which is your preference?
No, I think let's keep it for the end.
Okay, I'll keep them for the end. And just before we begin, Steve, are you with us?
Absolutely, Pete. And it's great to see you with us as well. Pete's has been through some surgery. So it's wonderful to see you so healthy, Pete. And we're glad you made it. But yeah, again, from our side, it's lovely to have Henny too. So, and we can never hear enough about HPV and, where it's fitting into the modern medicine. And things do change a lot. So we're looking forward to hearing the update, Henny.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. All right. And thank you for those kind words. Steve, you don't get rid of me that easy, which means that you can't get rid of weeds so easily. Okay. So we'll start then with Aspen. Sangiso, if you can just kick off with a few words from our sponsor for the afternoon HPV.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. De Jong. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the HPV update webinar. Firstly, a special thank you to Aspen and GSK for allowing us to actually sponsor this important session. My name is Songezo Mchacha. I'm the Group Brand Manager for Vaccines Portfolio at Aspen. So the HPV in general remains a very significant health concern in South Africa. And I think increasing awareness is key critical to reducing the burden of HPV-related diseases. So I know this session is going to be very valuable. The HPV vaccine that we look after is Severix at Aspen and GSK, which primarily protects against HPV type 16 and 18. And it offers cross-protection against other oncogenic strains, which Prof. Henny will touch on, I think, later on in the presentation. It's indicated for the dosing is for 2 doses for ages 9 to 14, and then 3 doses for 15 years and above with no upper age limitation. Okay. And we have sufficient stock available in the market, and the pricing for Severix is 1,100, inclusive of VAT. For any brand-related questions, we will share a quick slide. I'm not sure if we can do it now or later. Dr. de Jong, you guide me, which then shows the contact details of every Aspen employee, which they can send all queries to. So I hope you
Yeah. So
find.
if we could say it at the end, I'll tell you why. So people can dash around and get pens and paper in their cameras. So
Perfect.
at the end, they can take that information. So they can contact their local representative. Firstly, for the doses. Secondly, for the
Correct.
prices. And thirdly, if you can off air, Sangeeta was showing me a very special HPV mug. And maybe you can give them all that HPV mug. The wonderful promotional tool to give a mug, HPV. But maybe not. Maybe that's just being forward. So, Sangeeta, thank you so much for those few words.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Okay, Annie?
Okay, so it's over to me then. Okay, so thank you everyone. Let me just see if I can get this out of my way. So colleagues, I will give you a bit of a selection of an HPV journey because I think it can be a little bit boring to try and cover absolutely everything, but just to remind you that we still have a significant problem with cervical cancer incidence and mortality in South Africa. These are recent estimates of the incidence of cervical cancer in South Africa. And you can see that our rate of 35 per 100,000 women per year is unacceptably high. If you compare that to places like Australia, which is now at less than 4 per 100,000 women per year, in the Netherlands down to about 6. We are far, far behind in terms of cervical cancer prevention. So it is the second most common cancer in terms of incidence after breast cancer in women, but it's the number one cause of mortality. So more people die of cervical cancer than any other cancer in South Africa. And if you think about young people between the ages of 15 and 44, you can see that it's the number one in terms of incidence and mortality. So this is a disease that affects people in the prime of their lives, and it is completely unnecessary because we have the tools to eliminate this problem diagnosis and clinical. It's really unnecessary for us to have this in 2025. Just a quick reminder that HPV is not only causing cervical cancer, it is involved in many other anatomical sites. On the right-hand side, you can see cancers in women. Virtually all cervical cancers are caused by HPV. Virtually all anal cancers are caused, squamous cell carcinomas are caused by HPV, and then a significant proportion of vaginal cancers. In South Africa, we know that the vulvar cancers are driven mostly by HPV, so this is an inaccurate figure for South Africa. We're probably looking at about 50 to 75% of vulvar cancers are driven by HPV in South Africa. And then also more recently, we understand that oropharyngeal tumors are often associated with HPV. In men, penile cancer and anal cancer is also strongly associated with HPV. I want to share with you a paper that was recently published from HPV-related cancers in South Africa and trends over the last 10 years. This is a paper that looks at the changes in incidence of HPV-related cancer. On the top, you will see a table representing cancers occurring in females. And at the bottom, you see a table with cancers in males. And you can see that there's been a fairly steady, very high incidence of cervical cancer between the years of 2011 and 2021. So cervical cancer is high, the incidence is high, and it stays high. But a cancer like vulvar cancer has seen a rapid, significant increase in incidence over the last 10 years. And we think it's most likely because of an association with people living long term with HIV. So now they have fairly good control of their HIV disease. It allows this HPV, the persistent infections with HPV, to develop into vulvar cancers, and you can see a similar trend with anal cancers in women, almost also probably associated with HIV. In men, you can see a significant rise in penile cancers and also in anal cancer. So we certainly have a long way to go to try and prevent HPV-related cancers in South Africa. There are multiple types of HPV around, but we know that some of these viruses are more oncogenic than other types, and the bad guys in the journey towards cancer are really from two species, and you can see the alpha 9 and the alpha 7 groups of viruses are really the most important. And you can see type 16 in the alpha 9 species. And then closely related to 16 is types 31 and 35. And this is important when we think about cross protection. So if you prevent HPV 16 with a vaccine, that antigen looks very similar to HPV 31 and 35. So often you get cross protection between a vaccine that protects against 16, also for types 31 and 35. And then the alpha 7 species include HPV type 18, which we also know is extremely oncogenic, and that's closely related to HPV type 45. And this will again give you some idea of why we get this phenomena of cross protection if we think about HPV vaccines. On this slide, I want to just again share in a visual format how the WHO now classifies different HPV types according to oncogenicity. And you can see in a traffic light type of coloring in red, we see the group 1A viruses. So the International Agency of Research on Cancer calls oncogenic HPV viruses as group 1 oncogenic viruses. And you can see WHO now calls that group 1A, by far the most oncogenic, and almost 60% of all cervical cancers are caused by just this one type. So an HPV vaccine to work must have type 16 included. And then in orange you see the next oncogenic types 18 and 45. And you can see together they contribute another approximately 20% of cervical cancers. And that is followed by the next group, which is now called group 1C, which include probably another 10% of cancers. And then the rate drops off significantly. And this is important to understand when we start talking about screening and how do we interpret a screening result with different HPV types. So a result with an HPV 16, it carries a lot more risk than a result, for instance, with type 66 or type 51. So HPV genotypes matter, and we'll get to a little bit more detail in a few minutes. So what about HPV in other anatomical sites? Is HPV 16 still driving all those cancers? And we can see that HPV 16 in all the anatomical sites is by far the most important villain. It causes the majority of cancers at all the anatomical sites, but we see the hierarchy, the importance of different HPV types below type 16 may be differing slightly in different anatomical sites. And we can sort of see that HPV 35 becomes really important in some of the other anatomical sites. Just one quick slide about the association or the interaction between HIV and HPV. And we all know that in people living with HIV, there's a much higher rate of virally driven cancers. And we see this in the enormous risk ratio associated with HPV related anal cancer in people living with HIV, with an incidence that's almost 20 times higher in people living with HIV. The risk for vulva cancer is about 10 times higher in people living with HIV. Penile cancer is about 5 times higher. Cervix is probably closer to 6 times higher. This is a conservative figure. But people living with HIV is at particular high risk for HPV-driven cancers, and we must vaccinate these individuals as early as possible. Let's go back a little bit to cervical cancer and the call to action of the WHO. In 2017, they launched this campaign and they called it the call to eliminate cervical cancer by the year 2030. And the three targets set by the WHO to achieve this goal is to firstly do primary prevention through vaccinating 90% of eligible girls by the age of 15. Quite an ambitious target, but we're not that far away from reaching that target in South Africa. Then the second important target is to screen 70% of adult women between the ages of 35 and 45 with a high performance test. And I think it is now clear that cytology is not the answer. Cytology is not the high performance test that we need to eliminate cervical cancer, and we need to move rapidly to HPV testing. And then the third target is to treat 90% of those women identified with a positive screening test for their pre-cancer or cancer. This is very difficult to achieve. There's often a lot of loss to follow up between a positive screening test and getting appropriate treatment. But that's a little bit outside of the scope for tonight's talk. So I'm going to focus now, firstly, on this first target, which is primary prevention through vaccination. I think on this slide, what I want to show you is how vaccines work. I know you are probably all familiar with some of this already, but if you look at this picture, you can see at the top we have the squamous epithelium of the ectocervix. And then at the squamocolumnar junction, we now see the endocervical epithelium in the endocervix. And how we think that an HPV infection happens is through small breaks in this epithelium, where the virus enters into the epithelium and reaches the basement membrane, infects these basal cells. And then over time, these infected cells will start producing virus, which will eventually then be shed. If you have an unvaccinated individual, there's very little natural immunity against HPV. It's non-specific. The virus can enter easily without any resistance into this break in the epithelium. It can easily infect the basal cells. It will cause active growth of the virus, which then cause koilocytosis, which we often saw on cytology in the past. And these abnormal cells will then eventually release the viruses on the surface to infect the next person coming along. What we see in a vaccinated person with an appropriate HPV vaccine is that you get very specific neutralizing antibodies against HPV that leaks into this injury in the epithelium. It coats the virus and it protects the individual from infection. So if you vaccinate, you get a more specific immune response that will prevent infection by HPV. So how should we approach HPV vaccination in the population? You can either do a risk-based vaccination, in other words, assess somebody in your practice the person that's sitting in front of you according to risk and decide whether you're going to vaccinate or not. But there's very particular problems with this approach, and that's it's often difficult to find or to see an individual with a high risk for a particular disease. They might already have contracted the HPV before you even identify them as high risk. It leads to stigmatization. Because you don't cover the entire population, you don't ever get herd immunity. And it's almost as costly as just doing universal HPV vaccination. So what we really want to do is to get to the point where we can target all the individuals within a particular age group or in a particular population. And this is definitely the way to go if we want to get the best clinical outcomes. If we can reach high enough coverage rates with HPV vaccination, we will get herd protection. And you can see that now in some of the real world data that comes from people that started vaccinating long ago. School-based programs are particularly efficient and cost-effective, and it avoids discrimination. It avoids having that discussion to try and figure out whether somebody is at high risk for an HPV infection or not. This is a table that I don't know. Can you see this table properly, or do you also see the taskbar at the top? Was it only me?
And yeah, we see the table and the population schedule and rationale. Yeah, we see that.
Okay, you see that. Okay, but so it's only on my screen that I see the taskbar.
Yeah,
Is
there's
it?
no
But in
taskbar
a
on our
way.
side.
Okay, so this is a potential table that we want to publish soon. This has been accepted for publication, and you'll notice a few important things here if we think about the ideal population in South Africa that should be vaccinated. In girls, you might notice that one dose is now recommended, and that is not what is in the current label for the bivalent or the other vaccines that are available in South Africa, but this is a WHO recommendation, and I'll show you a little bit of data that supports a single dose in this young cohort of individuals. And then for slightly older adolescent girls, again, 1 or 2 doses. I think most people will probably give 2 doses in this population. WHO feels it's safe to give only 1 dose of the vaccine. But at the age of 21 or above, you should give at least 2 doses of the HPV vaccine to get long-lasting protective immunity. In people living with HIV, we recommend 3 doses of the vaccine. And in other immune-compromised individuals, like people maybe after an organ transplant, you would also recommend 3 doses of the vaccine. And then for women undergoing treatment for pre-cancer, I think our recommendation will be in South Africa to consider vaccination around the time of treatment. I don't have time tonight to go into all the evidence around this matter, but I'll show you a few slides about that. So maybe just a little bit about the evidence for a single dose HPV vaccine. The Strategic Advisory Group of experts on immunization, the so-called SAGE group of WHO, fairly recently brought out a document to state that a single dose of the HPV in young people between the ages of 9 and 14 is enough to provide long-term effectiveness. And they base that on a few key studies. And I want to share with you 2 of these important studies that looked at different dosing schedules. This is a very well run study from Tanzania. It's called the Doris trial, where they randomized a total of 930 girls to 1, 2, or 3 doses of the bivalent vaccine, or 1, 2, or 3 doses of the 9-valent vaccine. And they managed to show that a single dose of the bivalent or the multivalent vaccine induces a robust immune response. So we think that this young group of children makes a fantastic immune response even after one dose of the vaccine. So they recommended after the study, reduced dose regimen is suitable for the prevention of HPV infection. A similar study from Kenya called the Kenshi study randomized almost 800 women to a 9-valent vaccine or to the bivalent vaccine or to a placebo vaccine, and they found similarly that a single dose of the vaccine, of the HPV vaccine, were highly effective in preventing persistent HPV infection. So we are seeing more and more evidence that a single dose is enough, and I think we can recommend that now for children in schools. And the current program that's run in South Africa changed from a 2-dose schedule in the past now to a 1-dose schedule. So girls will only be offered a single dose of the vaccine. So maybe just one or two quick thoughts about whether it makes sense to vaccinate somebody that already has a precancer lesion. So firstly, we need to acknowledge that our treatment for cervical precancer sometimes fail. This is a very comprehensive analysis done by Mark Arbain's group. Mark Arbain is one of the most spectacular epidemiologists working in the field of HPV. And they looked at a large number of studies on 45,000 women who had treatment for cervical precancers. They all had LETS procedures. And in that general population, these are not people living with HIV, this is a general population, they found a failure rate of their sort of treatment within 2 years of about 7%. So we know that a significant proportion of our patients will require more surveillance and treatment after a first treatment effort. We know that that's true, and maybe even more so for people living with HIV. And this is a paper from Gary Clifford's group at IARC that found the risk for failure, it's much higher in people living with HIV, with probably about a factor of 3. So in terms of a LETS procedure, there's a significant proportion of people that will fail. Can we reduce this risk of failure by giving a vaccine? So just as a reminder, we think in the general population, about 1 in 15 women will, within 2 years, have a CIN2 or sort of higher lesion again, even after a successful LETS. And in people living with HIV, that figure can be up to about 1 in 5. There's mounting evidence in the literature that giving an HPV vaccine might be useful. I don't have enough evidence yet to say it will be successful. And it's important to remember that this risk for precancer and even invasive cancer remains for many, many, many years after treatment with a LETS procedure. Up to 20 years down the line, people still have a much higher risk for cervical cancer and the repeat precancer. So in this population that had treatment for cervical precancer, the risk of invasive cancer is still at least 3 times higher than general population. Why do we think a vaccine might be able to help? It may prevent reinfection by an oncogenic strain of HPV. So say, for instance, you had a lesion caused by HPV 16, you've cleared it with your LETS procedure, the patient was well, and then 5 years down the line, she gets a new HPV 16 infection. That could potentially be prevented by a prophylactic vaccine. It will also prevent other infections that was not there previously, so with new types. But it will not take away an active infection. We cannot think of an HPV vaccine as a therapy. It will not take away residual disease. If you've done an incomplete resection of the precancer, the vaccine is not going to solve that problem. So, based on all of this, the American College of ONG currently has this recommendation on their website. And this recommendation is now about adjuvant HPV vaccination for patients undergoing treatment for cervical intraepithelial neoplasia grade 2 or more. And what they say is based on data on the benefit of HPV vaccination, ACOG recommends adherence to the CDC recommendations for vaccination of individuals aged 9 to 26. So they say you can give the vaccine. And then they say in an older age group, consider adjuvant HPV vaccination for immunocompetent, previously unvaccinated people who are undergoing treatment for CIN. So it's not unreasonable to offer your patient that is scheduled for a LEDS procedure to get an HPV infection. But I think it's important to manage the expectations of your patients in this scenario very carefully. It will not prevent an active infection. It is not a guarantee that the lesion will not come back, but it might reduce the risk a little bit.
And that's full vaccination, Henny.
Full three doses. Three doses.
Right.
Full doses. And ideally, you will want to give the first dose before you do the LEDs or at the time of the LEDs so that those antibodies can be around as early as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so because we are tonight sponsored by the bivalent vaccine, I thought I'd show you a little bit of evidence. Initially, let's focus on the efficacy study. So this is now before licensing, this work was done. And this is now evidence of the long-term effectiveness of the bivalent vaccine. And this is the so-called Costa Rica vaccine trial. They randomized a large number of women, more than 7,000 women, to either getting the bivalent HPV vaccine or placebo. And you can see that after a decade, the vaccine efficacy was 97.4%. I mean, this is a spectacularly successful vaccine in preventing cervical precancer and cancer. It had a high efficacy for more than a decade after initial vaccination, supporting the notion that invasive cancer is preventable. That's the conclusion of the authors after this paper. And this is maybe just, it was already mentioned earlier, that we see cross protection. So even though the vaccine only has antigens against type 16 and 18, there's also partial protection against some other HPV types in that same family group. And in this study done on the Patricia data, you can see that HPV 16 and 18 vaccine also protected against types 33, 31, 45, and 51. So we can expect a little bit broader protection, even if you only give the vaccine against two types. This is very exciting data to show that the vaccine, this particular vaccine, works extremely well if it's given to the entire population. In Scotland, they started out with giving Cervarix or the bivalent vaccine. The initial school-based program was targeting girls aged 12 to 13 years old. And in that particular population, after about a decade of follow-up, they can see no cases of invasive cervical cancer when people are vaccinated at a very young age. And that makes sense because you've given the vaccine before they became exposed to HPV. If in that same region, they also did catch-up program of slightly older girls. Now, this is a group of girls vaccinated between the ages of 14 to 22. So we assume that some of them already had exposure to HPV by the time they got vaccinated. So you expect slightly less effectiveness. but they saw a significant reduction in incidence. So in the vaccinated population of slightly older women, the rate of abnormalities was 3.2 per 100,000 women compared to unvaccinated women of 8.4. So again, a significant reduction, even if you vaccinate at a slightly older age. And then there's data from the Netherlands, again using the bivalent vaccine, and again very large numbers of women. Those that were fully vaccinated with the bivalent vaccine had a 92% lower risk of cervical cancer and 81% lower risk of severe precancer after follow-up for 15 years. So if you just look at say for instance, if we just protected against types 16 and 18, you would have expected somewhere in the region of probably about 70 to 75% protection. But you can see the real world protection is much higher. We are looking here at a 92% protection. So where are we now in terms of HPV vaccine rollout internationally? Almost all countries now have HPV vaccination as part of their national programs. I think there's just over 190 countries in the world, so this 158 is almost there. Gavi-supported countries, in Gavi-supported countries, they think they've reached at least 86 million girls with HPV vaccination. And we estimate that more than 280 million doses have been given worldwide. So it's not a new vaccine anymore. This is now standard practice all over the world.
Sorry, Henny, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
what is Gavi? Gavi?
The Global Alliance for Vaccination and Immunization. So this is it's a global organization that helps with funding for vaccine rollouts in countries that don't have enough money to buy the vaccine themselves. I think it's sort of run by the United Nations.
Okay. Thank you.
If I may, I'm going to just say something about screening because I think I must say something about screening because it's so important at this point in time. So the target is that we should screen 70% of adult women with a high performance test. And it's quite clear that cytology is not that high performance test. Unfortunately, if you do a single cytology, the sensitivity of cytology is not good enough. If we're going to do infrequent screening, is what we can hope for in South Africa, is that maybe once or perhaps twice in a woman's lifetime she will get a screen. We need to do something that is more sensitive, and that is an HPV DNA test. HPV DNA testing is now available in the NHLS, in the public sector. It's available in all the private labs. And in future, we might start doing self-sampling. This is the way screening is done in Australia and the Netherlands, where women take their own samples and they don't need to go to the gynecologist to get their sample taken. So again, just a reminder briefly that not all HPV types are the same and that type 16, 18, and 45 are exquisitely oncogenic, and that's why we need to manage them differently. And then this next group is sort of intermediate risk or moderate risk, and then you've got a slightly lower risk group. For now, in South Africa, we're going to focus on 16, 18, and 45, and we're going to manage them differently. And the rest, all of these ones, we're going to triage with a second test. How do you interpret an HPV result? Many of you will now start getting results from the laboratory to say that we've done an HPV test. And the first thing you need to check is this a valid test? So there's an internal control in an HPV test that will tell you they've detected a human gene in the sample, which means that the sample was taken from a human and that there's enough DNA to actually say that this contains cellular material. So if there's no internal control beta globin gene, the test will be invalid, which means you need to go and recollect. But fortunately, very low rates of inadequacy, probably about definitely less than 4%. Okay, so most people if you do an HPV test, will test negative. And the good thing about a negative HPV test is that you can trust that this particular individual will not develop cancer in the next 5 to 10 years. And your negative predictor value, in other words, the trust that you can put in this test is so much more than in cytology because of the sensitivity of the test. So that's why we can say you don't have to see her again in 1 year to repeat the HPV test or the cytology. You can see her safely in 5 years' time. The next group is sort of this intermediate risk group of viruses. And for most of these results, we will do a second test, which in South Africa will most likely be a cytology. So on the same sample that you've taken for the HPV test, you then request a cytology. And then if you see an HPV type 16, 18, and 45, the alarm bells should start ringing because this is a person that's at a high risk for a current lesion. In other words, she now has a CIN2 or 3 or even a cancer, or she will develop one of those over the next few years. So this is almost my last slide. This is the new public sector algorithm in the Western Cape for screening that was launched, I think, 2 months ago. So in the public sector clinics now, women gets offered cervical cancer screening from the age of 30 years and older, and we do a primary HPV test. If the test is negative, we are happy to say that she only needs to come back in 5 years if she's living with HIV, and in 10 years if she's HIV negative. So the confidence that we have that this patient will not develop a precancer or cancer is enough for us to say we can have this extended period of before we do the next screening. If the HPV result comes back in this slightly older population, remember we only in the Western Cape start screening with HPV at the age of 30. If you want to screen before the age of 30, we will still use cytology. If you perhaps have somebody that's symptomatic or maybe somebody that has maybe a particular risk profile and you want to offer screening less than 30, we suggest that you do cytology. Okay, so now in this over 30-year-old population, if you're testing HPV 16 or 18 or 45 positive, that patient should go for a treatment visit. We don't necessarily say you should treat all of them at the first visit, but they should be examined. You can do colposcopy and biopsy if you want, but it's not a requirement. Or if somebody is older, had their children, our recommendation is that patient has enough of a risk to just treat without asking any further questions. And then if she
And what do you mean by treat? Do you mean see and treat?
See and treat. Most of the clinics that currently, well, the public sector clinics only have LETs to offer. But we hope to see rollout of thermal ablation devices. So thermal ablation is slightly less risky for the individual patient. It has less association with premature labor, etc. But I think the evidence is there to support doing a LETS for that person, even if you don't see a LETS.
Thank you.
Okay, and then for this other group, now you have an HPV virus which falls in that WHO 1C or 1D group. We know that there's an oncogenic risk, but the risk is not very high. For them, we will do a reflex cytology, and the NHLS is already doing that for us. And depending on the cytology, you will then be referred for either a treatment visit, if it's a high-grade cytological abnormality. If it's a low-grade lesion, she will get a repeat HPV test in 12 months. So you can see here if the cytology is low grade or maybe just a simple ascus, she needs to be followed up with a repeat HPV test in 12 months. What happens here after treatment is still a little bit uncertain exactly how we're going to manage that. But most likely, the first visit after treatment, you'll do an HPV test. It is if it's negative, you can reassure the patient that her risk for future disease is very low. If the HPV is positive, you probably need to do either a colposcopy or maybe start using cytology in that scenario. Okay, so
Henny,
yes,
sorry, can you just go back? I've got
yes.
a lot of people phoning me here to say that your face is on the bottom right hand of the slide. So maybe Chris can we're missing out your data. We got your face for the algorithm on the right bottom. How do we get, what does it say there? Just tell us what it says, where your face is.
Well, I can't see
So
my own
Pete,
face.
Pete, I can actually just minimize the bar with the faces and just click on the
Uh,
small line at the top. That'll make the whole thing small, and then you can see everything. Even you
okay.
can.
So if you just minimize it, it says follow up HPV test in 12 months. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. Thanks, Annie. That's what they wanted. Thank
But
you.
I'm happy to share this all the slides with the audience, or specifically maybe the document from the NHLS about the new screening algorithm, because I think it's
Yeah.
important for people if they're interested. We'll be gladly share it with everybody on the webinar tonight.
Well, they're
And
very
most
interested.
of it,
Hundreds of
yeah,
them. Yeah. Thank you.
most of us have taken a little screenshot of it already. So I
Yeah,
think
most of us have.
yeah.
It's just that some illiterate people didn't know how to get rid of Henny's picture or Donnie's picture. Okay.
Okay.
So
Let
now,
me do my last slide, and then we
yeah,
can quickly, then we can have a discussion. So,
yeah.
just a few reminders that we need to vaccinate all the girls in schools and try and get maximum coverage if we want to eliminate cervical cancer. Single dose is enough in these young girls. But over time, we need to vaccinate more women at older ages as well. But perhaps also start thinking about men. I think unless we do vaccination of girls up to maybe 80% or so, we should stick with our current program and just try and get as much coverage as possible, and then we can start thinking about boys and men. And then remember to vaccinate people living with HIV, all the people that are organ transplant recipients, and embrace HPV primary screening. So I'll stop sharing and then we can talk.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions. I'm going to ask Steve to fire away. The first question is on that last point you made, Henny, of vaccination. Do you offer blanket vaccination, or do women have to girls have to opt in? I'll tell you why I asked that question. I had a very sad case this month of a woman who was an anti-vaxxer and didn't let her daughter get vaccinated. The young daughter is now 22 years of age with high still. Can you believe it? Because the mother didn't allow it. And to me, it's a tragic case, and it just makes my heart weep when I see this. Do you offer everybody, or can they opt out? How do you see this?
Yeah, so the current school-based program asks for parental consent, so the parents must sign. But legally, apparently in South Africa, children can give assent as well. So if the child says, "I want the vaccine," despite what my mother says, if they're 12 or older, they can actually say, "I want the vaccine."
Okay,
Any on
so
that point? Yeah, just on that point.
yeah.
I mean, what do we say to these people who are kind of anti-vaxxers for whatever reason? I mean, is there a robust way of just allaying their fears, or what? I mean, I know the data is very supportive and it's very safe, but is there strategy that you've got before we go to the other questions quickly?
Yeah, I think, Stephen, it's a topic in itself, and I think we can invite. For a moment, I forget her name now, but there's somebody working at Sefako Makato University on vaccine hesitancy, and she gives an excellent talk on how you approach this problem and how do we do this properly. But I think it's a journey with a particular individual. We don't have an easy solution. People And in the era that we live in now with social media and Facebook and the experts are in your pocket all the time. I mean, why would you listen to, yeah, anybody
Absolutely.
else?
Yeah. Okay, we'll pop quickly we've got a lot of questions, Any. Thanks. It was a wonderful talk and you really prompted a lot of discussion. So from Katrine Middleton in East London, would 2 doses be enough for a 24-year-old boy? Just like one booster after 1 month?
2 doses, I think should be enough, but then give it 6 months apart. Don't, so if you're only going to use 2 doses, don't do it month one and sort of month 0 and month 1 or 0 and 2 months. You must keep them 6 months apart at least.
Okay. And then Graham Birdsey from the South Midlands. Again, thank you for a very helpful talk. Most of the data is from overseas. And then he's quoting one of his colleagues, Wendy Blormore, in KZN, producing a PhD showing a non-18, 16, and 45 HPV is a bigger cause of cervical cancer in their population than
Yeah,
us.
okay. So maybe I can just respond to that. So Wendy's work was on a pre-cancer population, and HPV 35 tends to jump up in many populations in Africa. So HPV 35, in terms of international literature, is more common in Africa and specific parts of Africa, not all of it. We see it in South and East Africa more than in West Africa. And then interestingly, in some American states, in Mississippi, where they have a very large African American population, they also see a spike in HPV 35. So we think that HPV 35 is probably one of those viruses that is maybe slightly more important in Africa. It was found in some of the other studies in Africa as well. Some of Lynn Denny's work as well showed HPV 35, but it is still significantly lower in terms of individual oncogenic risk than 16, 18, 45. So 35 is in that next group. It's there.
Okay, great. And then anonymous attendee is asking, can we use the ASCCP guidelines to manage patients in private practice in South Africa?
Yeah, so the ASCCP guidelines, I think, is a good guideline. It's evidence-based. I mean, it's probably the best evidence that we have available. I don't think it's necessary if we do primary cervical cancer screening to do cytology and HPV testing. We are not improving the test in any way. So in terms of co-testing, I think it's a waste of money. Do your HPV test. If it is positive, then decide whether you're going to triage or not. But ASCCP is, yeah, good guidelines done by good people.
And then thanks, it's great. Justin Rufendi also wants to ask, is the screening interval the same for HIV negative as well as HIV positive patients?
HIV positive. Yeah, so the WHO recommends that people living with HIV should be screened a little bit more frequently. So the guidelines for people living with HIV in the official WHO guidelines says for people living with HIV, they should be screened between 3 and 5 years if they're negative after the negative test. We've chosen in South Africa to make that 5 years. Similarly, for the general population, the WHO guidelines said if you're in the general population HPV negative, the screening interval can be 5 to 10 years. And we chose for South Africa to go with the 10 years to save resources, that we can rather screen more women and screen the same women more often. I mean, if that makes sense, because we need to cover more of the population.
Okay, and then thanks. And then obviously, then the question is, does the number of sexual contacts make a difference? And anonymous attendees asking, do you still screen every 5 years with someone who's got multiple sexual contacts?
Yeah, I think it's fine. I mean, if maybe you do your HPV test today and tomorrow you get a new HPV infection. Yes, that happens because you might have a new partner or whatever. There's a new virus around, but that virus needs a bit of time to get to the point of a pre-cancer and a cancer. So we have a bit of time because the nature of the disease is such that you don't get cancer on the day that you get the HPV infection. So that's why it's safe to wait 5 years.
Okay, that's great. I think that question is on answer. There's a next question by Anonymous that's answered as well with that answer. And then again, Justin Mufenda asks again, in a case of seroconversion, would you still continue with the 5-year interval? And again, I think it's the same thing. I mean, it doesn't really make a difference, whether they seroconvert during the 5 years.
Yeah, but I think, Stephen, it's always this balance that you need to have between a population-based approach and somebody in your in your rooms. I mean, if you're a practitioner looking at one individual patient, you might not follow the guidelines because you decide I overrule the guidelines because I see something different in front of me. But for the population, we need to make a practical plan that is fairly easy to implement, that has a straightforward algorithm. And in that sense, I would sort of say for the algorithm, for your population-based screening, 5 years for people living with HIV and 10 years for the general population.
Great. So Nadia then is the last question. Yeah, Nadia van der Westhuizen and comes up with a clinical query. And what if a patient is HIV?
Then I've got another.
Pete, sorry.
You finished. Sorry, Steve.
Yes.
Nadia, yeah?
Yeah. So Nadia's basically asking if a patient is HPV negative now, then gets HPV 16 the next year, and then you only screen in 5 years, you end up with a cancer. She sees a lot of young patients who are younger than 30 with HPV 16. And she says she did a colposcopy yesterday for a 23-year-old CIN3 with HPV 16, and really just asking about the rationale of screening at 30, and this whole issue of the promiscuous lifestyle being very common. Do you have a comment about that?
Yeah, again, the patient sitting in front of you might have risk factors which will make you sort of say, I'm not going to follow the guidelines for the national policy. I'm going to screen this patient a little bit younger. For the National Department of Health, I don't know if it was launched last week or not, but for the national guidelines, we said start screening with HPV at the age of 25. The only problem with using HPV screening in that very young population is we share HPV very effectively at a young age because we have, more skin-to-skin contact in general. And then you pick up a lot of infections that will not lead to precancer because they will clear through normal immunity. So we don't want to screen the very young population with HPV, rather use cytology in that scenario. Otherwise, you'll see a lot of people with a transient infection that will be gone in the next 6 months. You make them concerned. While I think this age group between 25 and 30 is maybe a little bit gray and difficult to navigate. But don't let us not get stuck on the detail, really. What the principle is, for the general population, let's start at the age of about 25 to 30 with HPV testing, and look at the genotype that you find and then make a decision on that.
Excellent. I think you've pretty much answered most of the other questions. Pete, was there anything else?
Yeah, can I have it? I have a large gay population, and lots of them want to do self-sampling, except it seems to be very expensive. Or why, I don't know. What is your preferred method of self-sampling for HPV in gay women or women that are VI or any other woman that doesn't want a speculum or need a speculum? Any?
Yeah, so most places in the world just use a normal flock swab. There are a few companies that make dedicated swabs. It's purely a little swab that comes in a plastic container, which needs to be put into the vagina. Remember, the thing about self-sampling for HPV is you don't need to sample the cervix or the transformation zone. So the point is not to get HPV from the surface of the cervix. It purely needs to go into the vagina. So you would sort of insert the flock swab about 5 centimeters into the vagina, twist it 100 and sort of 3 times. What is that? 360 times.
768.4.
Exactly. Sort of turn it about 3 times, put it back into the plastic container and send it to the laboratory. Many of the labs now provide little kits.
They do.
And one of the important things to just make sure is that the labeling is correctly done and that you identify the sample belongs to that individual. But self-sampling is the way to go in future. I think we're not quite there yet in the general population, but in Australia, the majority of women now are screened with self-sampling. They do their own
Can I
sampling.
Okay.
follow up on that? Why are we not there yet in South Africa?
I think it's partly because we need to educate our providers, the clinicians. We can do it. It's easy to do. That's not the problem. But if you do self-sampling without proper education about how to manage the results and how to interpret things, I think give us 5 years. We need to get used to doing HPV testing first.
Yeah, that's where we start.
And I think within about 5 to 10 years, we'll be ready for the individual patient, I don't have any problem for them to take their own sample. That is the way to go. But let's just give the system a little bit of time to get there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Makes sense.
Steve, we've had a wonderful afternoon, and it's been a fitting closure to episode 12, series 65. I'm going to ask you to, as the senior man, thank Professor Henny Botha. Thank you very much indeed. And also thank Aspen for their sponsorship.
Yeah, well, I mean, that certainly was a grand finale, Henny. I mean, we really enjoyed that. I think we could have gone on for another hour with lots of questions. And really just thanks for updating us. I think, you've really given us a great, ideas to what the current practice is. And I think we all have a much better idea now as to, what the guidelines say and, how we should go on a day-to-day screening. So, I mean, that's fantastic. So thanks for taking your time to present this talk. And then again, thanks to Aspen for the sponsorship. And thanks again to Pete for his hard work this year. Pete really is the driver of these sessions and puts the program together with Chris. So much appreciated, and glad to see you survived your surgery. And thanks to Chris as well for doing all the hard admin work on these webinars. And so great, and it was wonderful having so many people join so many of the sessions this year. Henny, I mean, there were more than about 120, 130 people on tonight. So just again to show what the impact you do make on talking a webinar like this. So much appreciated. Pete, I'll leave you to the final word.
Who? Me? Whose final word? Me.
You, Pete. You're the final word.
I thought you were Mr. Final Word. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been wonderful having you in 2025. I can just thank all of you, and a special final word to our delegates, hundreds and hundreds of people that have been with us. We always remember at the end of the year those poor people that have passed away to our knowledge. We remember Ahmad Davids, who passed away 2-3 months ago. And a special word of thanks to Ahmad, who is well known and widely loved in Cape Town and beyond. And of course, Tim Draycott that died recently. And a special thank you to all the people that have been with us. And we look forward to having you in 2026. It's going to be in February. And until then, safe home and God bless. For those of you that celebrate Hanukkah or Christmas or whatever else you celebrate, please celebrate responsibly. And we look forward to then. And also in your diary, remember, in the beginning, the middle of winter, it's just, did we say June, Henny?
5 to 8 August. 5 to 8
August. Right in Cape Town, 5 to 8 of August. It's going to be wonderful having you all here. We'll continue this discussion. I'm sure we will at that stage. God bless. All the very best. And thanks to Chris, and good night. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.